So what I was thinking is Oklahoma. It's very different from Philadelphia and New York, and I assume it took a while for the wrestling to evolve to that point too. So my question is twofold. One, what was the scene like at that point? And two, and this is just a random thought, did you ever have any like old mid South like veterans working on any of these shows who would come in for a payday? Was that something that you would see often in these early years, like 2001, 2000, that time?
So, man, what was the scene like in Oklahoma? Me. There were two places. Like I said, there was Mid South in Oklahoma, and then there was OCW in which I believe was Oklahoma Championship Wrestling in Tulsa. Like I said, 2 hours apart, but and they had worked together, and some of the guys had crisscrossed, but then they stopped. Uh, Tulsa, I think, would have been like your more I want to say more modern style. Like it was still sort of early indies, and it sort of still had territory-ish feels. Like you'd still do a lot of your old Memphis spots and whatnot. You could get by on doing that because that's what the fan base had grown up like on Mid South and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So that like that sort of house style. So it was at least best I recall, from what I told now, a little bit rough. Uh,
So it's a more, physical, maybe
a little
punch kick
bit.
style as opposed
Oh,
to
baby.
a low key, amazing red kind of taking off.
Well, I mean, there were those, but the young guys that were starting, like myself, like that's those were the guys that I was watching on the Indies. So I was starting to try to do some of those things. I know that anyone, if any of my students see this, they'll think that's wild. Me being one of the guys, like I was doing the things that were new at one point. It's true though, but like I was, I was stealing all the things I would see from the East Coast guys that were over and cool, or like seeing how they did the moves or how they did their spots, and then taking that and then trying to make slight adjustments on that so it was similar but not quite the exact same. You know what I mean?
And if not a lot of people
But
were doing that in that area, then that's going to stand out because how many of the fans at that point are seeing that?
I'm assuming not a lot. But like I said, the guys that I was coming up with, these were guys. Even if they didn't watch the indie stuff, these were the guys that grew up on the WCW cruiserweight
Yeah,
division, which is
sure.
your variant on the New Japan indie style, and especially WCW because it was such a mixing pot of all those guys. You could see all those styles. I feel that that's a thing that influenced a lot of fellas that didn't watch a lot of indie stuff at that time.
How did the scene evolve? Because uh, you were there for what I want to say like 6 years or something like that, and doing the Oklahoma indie scene. I could be a little off on that, but you were there for quite a while. Did you
Yeah,
watch it evolve in that period, or did it kind of stay mostly the same over the next, half a decade or so?
I was there about 6 years is right because I moved to California in '07. So it changed some. It was getting a little bit more modern. Guys were doing like it wasn't all exact same formula. Guys were starting to mix and match. It was becoming more like your standard indie scene, but just the Oklahoma version. So not and a lot of the guys at that time were either coming in from other places, other promotions had come up, other guys had started at the schools and had grown into it, and like those all those other fandoms and influences now are all whirling together and coming together and like starting to build off that.
I know you still occasionally go back because when I was diving through some of your matches, I saw maybe was it this year, last year, at some point you had one show like out in that area. Is it? I'm sure by now it's everything's caught on because the internet and everything. But now is it just pretty much like everywhere else when you went back from what you've seen, or
So I mean it was definitely indie wrestling, like and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like it sort of felt the same to
mm-hmm.
a certain extent. Like there were still guys. So when I was working in Tulsa, I miss working in Tulsa. Miss Mitch. Miss anyway, sorry. Point being, So the guys were, it was a mix. It was like there were some guys who still had more of a, this is the way we should do it, and some guys have more of that mixed style that you'll see everywhere else. So in the last Texas, I always felt a little bit ahead of Oklahoma on that as far as the evolution went, just
That
stylistically.
that makes sense because I know Tim Storm, he went through something pretty similar too. Again, plugging that in. If you guys go check it out, where once he went into Texas, like then suddenly there was the lucha influence, and that was heavy, and that wasn't something he necessarily had a lot in Arkansas, So when he went over to Texas, suddenly you had the lucha, and then at that point, you had like the Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy, and with that, you had the likes of Brian Kendrick and Brian Danielson and stuff, and like that was where they were training and wrestling early on in like 2001-ish in that period. And that just really changed up what the Texas scene was like. And I did see that you traveled a little bit to Texas. How much traveling did you do prior to going out to California?
And a little bit here and there. Like I said, I was going with Brad Michaels to a couple spots in Texas and said work consistently at those spots, but I had also got there through him. And then I think one way or t'other, their business relationship ended, and I had gone myself a few times. But
do you remember the company, or was it just kind of like fly by night?
XCW? It was a TCW for a while, then XCW, and it had a name.
Was that traditional championship wrestling or something different?
I think it was. Oh, brother, I couldn't.
No, it's not a big deal.
I said I couldn't begin to tell you what they were because even the T changed a few times. I think.
Okay.
I think it stayed TCW for a while before it became XCW, but I think that T changed a time or two.
And the traveling, did that kind of open your eyes up a little bit about what indie wrestling could be? Because again, I know it wasn't like necessarily Ring of Honor, but if you're going to these places and it's a little more advanced, was that exciting for you?
So yeah, but I had also gone to places where I would say it was less advanced than where we were.
Okay.
Said with the guy who took Brad Michaels took me under his wing, so I went to a few shows, just smaller shows. I'm not saying that not everyone on the show was. They were rough, some of them, but they were just little spot shows. There were a couple guys who had been around and done places and worked the tail end of the territories, had worked the territories and come back, and they were all fairly solid, or a lot of them were solid, and then some of the locals or those small scene locals, oh baby, you'd get some interesting characters for sure. So I'd seen that, but like going to Texas and seeing some of the guys work, like the Overboys, it was they were a tag team out of Texas. They were one of my favorite tag teams for the longest time. They were so good. I felt if they had traveled more, because they were both very good, but they were both also short and thin, which in 2001 was a way bigger deal than
2023.
Like today, it wouldn't be a thing, and they'd be all over the place. But like seeing those guys work in that style and other guys in Texas who had done things and would do more, either because of the lucha influence or because they had trained with someone who came out of the territories, and then maybe they had done like a tour of somewhere and then come back, So you got a lot more mix there. So it's always interesting to see just how like stylistically different it ended up being.